Okay, go ahead and speak.
All right, Deadly Tarantula Girl here with Beauty and the Beast. The beast was not present tonight. As you guys probably know, he has a tiny little one at home. So that's wonderful for him and his wife. We have a wonderful guest on tonight, Miss Kathy. Oh my goodness, one of my heroes. I really don't even have words to express how wonderful this woman is. So here she is, Miss Kathy Love. Welcome to our show tonight.
Thank you.
How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thank you.
Excellent. Do you want to start off?
Actually, yes. If possible, I would like to ask you some questions. Back in the 80s, when you were doing your traveling reptile show, I worked in the 90s. I worked in a pet store in Rimrock Mall, Billings, Montana, called the Animal Farm. And my boss said that you guys actually stopped with them. And I just thought that was really neat. I was wondering if you remember.
Oh, you're breaking up quite a bit, but I got the gist of what you said. Yes, we did. From about 73 to 75 or 6 or somewhere in that 1970s, mid 1970s, traveled all around the United States with a traveling reptile exhibit.
Well, I remember he said that he ended up some.
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand that.
Maybe we should try outside.
Okay. No, but we can't really I guess that's okay. Okay.
We're gonna try to find a spot that's not quite so noisy, so you'll be able to hear us better. Give us just a second to move. For some reason, our equipment isn't allowing us to hear Kathy when she's speaking. I'll just hold it. It's okay. Got some puppies that are wild. Can you still hear us, Kathy?
I can hear you great, and I hear the doggies too.
Oh, no. Just turn them around.
Well, I'm glad all the technology is not my responsibility.
Yeah, I'm happy that it's my responsibility. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So my second question, Puma's gonna have to go in so you can hold it. Can you give us a little bit? Where are you going? I'm taking care of him. You come over here. And my second question is you talked in a few other interviews that you knew Joe Laszlo. I was wondering if you could share a few stories about him. He's a hero of mine, and I never got to meet him.
Oh, Joe is great, and he was one of my early mentors. We actually dated for a while during my Living Jungle days. My business partner in the Living Jungle, the traveling reptile exhibit, was a roommate of Joe Laszlo's, and so that's how I got to meet both of them when I took a trip down to San Antonio from Wisconsin, where I lived at the time, and went to the zoo there and met the two of them, and decided that I would love to do something with reptiles instead of working as a nurse's aide, which I was doing at the time. So Joe
Wow.
was a real character. He had a very strong Hungarian accent. And in the 50s, when the Russian tanks were coming through Hungary, he was out there throwing things at the tanks with a lot of other activists, resistors. And so he escaped to the United States and was not allowed to go back to Hungary as long as the Soviet Union had any control over it.
Wow. Did he ever tell you the story about defecting?
He didn't tell me any details. It was mostly pretty much what I told you. I don't think it was a fun time that he liked remembering a lot.
Right. Well, Joe obviously was one of the pioneers in, breeding stuff and kind of figuring out some of those secrets, which historically were very coveted by breeders. So, did he share any of that insider info with you when you guys were dating?
Very much. He was very
Oh,
much a person who liked to share everything with anybody who was interested. And he talked to a lot of the zoo people. At that time, there were very few private people actually breeding anything consistently. It was pretty much just luck of the draw. And back at that time in the late 60s and early 70s, the few people who bred, mostly colubrids, mostly would catch them in the wild. In the first year or so they would breed and have good eggs, and then as successive years went by they would breed less and have less fertile eggs. And Joe was the person who was trying to convince everybody, you've got to keep them cool, Mon, he would say. He had a Coca-Cola cooler in the back of the reptile house at the San Antonio Zoo, and he would put animals from temperate climates in the Coca-Cola machine set to a warmer setting in the 50s or 55 or 60 or so. And he was having success where most people were not. So he was the one who got a lot of the early colubrid breeders to start putting the animals in their basements in the winter, or whatever, to cool them down. My local reptile zoo people in Wisconsin were telling me you can't breed consistently because you got to get them cool, and if you get them cool, they'll catch colds and die. So it's just luck. You can't do it consistently. So Joe was very instrumental in getting that word out there about what to do, especially for the North American colubrids.
My understanding was he was a huge fan of the all the smaller species of rattlesnakes too. I heard he was one of the guys that produced some of them species in captivity.
He did, and some of the exotic vipers. He used to call them his vipers. He loved his vipers. So he did keep and reproduce some of the both North American pit vipers and exotic vipers.
Very cool.
wow. That Joe Laszlo is someone that we never got to meet. And of course, he's passed away since. So that's really wonderful to be able to just hear some of the history. So tell us a little bit about the early traveling zoo days. That must have been exciting.
It was really exciting because I was just your typical, uh, like 20, early 20 something, and I had kept a number of pet snakes, and I spent some time at the Milwaukee Zoo and the Milwaukee Public Museum, getting to know some of the reptile people there. Uh, we did have a Southeastern Wisconsin Herpetological Society that I went to all the meetings for and everything. But at that time, it was just all so new. People that are much younger don't realize how difficult it was to get information. There weren't any keeping books. You had your little TFH, so you own an iguana type book. Uh, there weren't in-depth keeping and breeding books at that time because it was all so new. One of the more exciting books was a chapter at the end of one of the Carl Caulfield books, and it was called "So You Want a Boa, or So You Want to Keep a Boa," and it was a whole chapter about how to take care of a pet boa constrictor, and that was really advanced for the time. I read that chapter over and over. So getting to meet somebody like Joe, and then by extension, we traveled around and met a lot of people that he knew, or just going to zoos as we traveled around the country with our reptile exhibit. We got to meet people like Roger Conant when we were traveling out west, and he actually even came into our exhibit. Talk about a thrill. And we got to meet private breeders. You never could have afforded to do that unless you were independently wealthy or doing something like we were doing. So for a person in their early 20s who is new to all of this and just a pet keeper, it was a great education.
Well, you just mentioned Roger Conant. When in third grade, the very first book that I got, well, it wasn't the first book I got, but I read one year, I read more pages than anybody else in my school. And they had a bunch of books sitting there, and Conant's Reptiles and Amphibians in North America was there. And I snatched it up, and somebody sniped it from me, so I no longer have it and dearly miss it. I really loved that book.
It was so exciting, but I always had more of a farmer mentality than go out in the wild and catch it mentality. So I was always looking for the keeping and breeding, and that was my dream to be able to do that kind of stuff back when there were only a few people just scratching the surface. So most of the books that were available were field guides and things about the wild snakes, which most of the Caulfield and Ditmars type books were about snakes in the wild. So that was great, but it wasn't the core of what I really wanted to do. Those books came later.
So did you ever get to meet Lawrence Klauber out of California?
No, no,
He-
no. Got his books eventually, but never met him.
So what was the timeline? Around what years were you doing the traveling zoo?
Well, that was kind of the mid 70s, maybe. I think we started at either 72 or 73,
Okay.
and it could have even been 74, right in there. And we did it for about 2 or 3 years, so mid 70s basically. And then
Wow.
my husband Bill came to work for us, and after another year or two after he came to work for us, we decided that we wanted to get married and settle down and try our hand at actually raising reptiles. We were lucky enough to breed a couple of them right there in the exhibit, but we really wanted to try our luck at doing a lot more of that and less of the travel. Couldn't do the travel and do that, but I'm always so thankful for those years of traveling and meeting so many people. Back then, every phone call was a long distance call. There was no internet. The books that I was interested in were few and far between. So communication was not nearly as easy as it is now.
Right. Oh, technology is a blessing for the most part, and as far as gathering information and being able to speak with people. So as a woman working with reptiles in the 70s, did you feel that you encountered a lot of prejudice or people having preconceived notions about you?
Oh, well, there weren't very many women in our whole big group of the Herp Society in the Milwaukee area. I only remember one other woman who was about my age. There might have been a couple others, but I don't remember them. So we were few and far between. I didn't really encounter that much prejudice. Uh, I've had other women tell me that they have, probably because fairly early on I was doing it as a business with a male partner, and then later on my husband and I were doing it together, and he was interested in not all the exact same aspects that I am. He was always more interested in the photography and the wild animals, and somewhat interested in the captive breeding, but not as much as I was. So we had different aspects of the same hobby, but we were a team. And then once the breeding started more in earnest, which probably would be more in the mid to late 80s, and once the first corn snake morphs and other morphs, albinos and things like that, became available, more women started getting into it, and lizards. A lot of women would start with leopard geckos or brightly colored corn snakes, and I was also into the brightly colored colubrid snakes. So more and more women began to get into it at that point.
That's exciting.
You mentioned in a couple of the interviews I've watched you in recently that you referred to Dr. Bern Bechtel, the guy that had the first albino corn snake. Did you get to know him, or did you ever know him?
Yes, we actually got to be pretty good friends with him because he was in southern Georgia near Valdosta, and we were in Florida by that time. Once we stopped doing the traveling, we settled down in Southwest Florida and got married in March of 1979 and lived there for most of our adult lives until about 10 years ago or so. So we would make trips up to see Dr. Bechtel, and he came out. He was a dermatologist by profession, so he really understood a lot more about all of the color morphs and pattern morphs and everything than most people would, being a dermatologist. And he did write a book. So he was another great mentor that I'm sorry, to see he's passed now, but he was considerably older. So we were so lucky to have really learned people as mentors when we were young. And Dr. Bechtel was certainly one of them. And I'm really sorry that so many of the younger people now, uh, when you ask them about the important people in herpetoculture, they think about the biggest ball python breeders and that sort of thing. And most of them don't know much about people like Joe Laszlo and Dr. Bechtel.
Right.
Well, we're lucky enough to come around when some of our big mentors were Barney Tomberlin, and of course, Earl Turner was a guy that kind of mentored us, and we had some older people that were older than us out of Houston that did a lot for us to teach us. Um, it's Dr. Bechtel. What kind of personality was he? Was he a comedian? Was he dead serious?
Well, Dr. Bechtel seemed kind of like an older gentleman even when we first met him. When would that? That probably would have been probably in the mid to late 80s. And he never seemed to change, but he was a very gracious host, and his wife too, very gracious host, and we really loved visiting with them. And he would show us the latest and greatest different thing he was working with. He did gift us an albino black rat snake back when they were still really rare, because we wanted to create some albino or amelanistic uh, Glades rats. We were working with Everglades rats, and we had a really nice bloodline. And at that point, there had not been an amelanistic yellow rat. So we worked with that, and I think there's still people working with that line now that are kind of mixed between yellow albino and black rat. I don't know what they've done with them in recent years. They may be 99.999% Glades rat by now.
Well, do you know the story about how he acquired that albino corn snake, the very first one?
Yes, and actually, my husband and an Australian friend did video DVD that we were selling for a long time. They made it quite a few years ago, and it's called Reptile Mania. It's not really much available now unless you find somebody who's got an old copy. But in it, he did some reenactments with people, and he reenacted the scene of finding the first amelanistic corn snake in the wild. It was just a construction worker driving home, and I believe it was in the Carolinas, and he found it crossing the road and knew it was something weird and different, and coaxed it into his toolbox. And I think, boy, it's been a long time since I've thought about this. I think it went to a zoo in maybe in Texas, and they didn't have much luck breeding it, but eventually it went to Dr. Bechtel, and he was the first one to breed it and then breed back to its offspring and produce the very first amelanistic corn snakes and prove that statistically it was a simple recessive trait. First time it had ever been done in a reptile, to my knowledge.
Wow. Do you talking to him? How confident was he that breeding the parent back to the offspring is going to produce amels for him?
Oh, he was pretty sure because amelanistic in other species of animals, including people, I believe, it's always a simple recessive trait. So he was quite certain it would be in the snakes too.
So I got a question about another snake. Craig Trumbauer did snake hunting and even more than snake hunting. And in that story, he talks about Bill Love uh, somehow acquiring a snow eastern diamondback. Uh, was that animal with you on the tour?
I no, when Bill joined us, he was living in Florida already, and he put his reptiles that he had on loan to various friends in Florida, and didn't take them with him. But then later, the same year we got married in 1979, and we weren't traveling anymore. Just for the summer, we set up a reptile exhibit up in the Smoky Mountains in Pigeon Forge. We called it Creature Feature. Didn't make any money, but we learned a lot and had a lot of fun. So we had the white rattlesnake snowflake on display there, and we actually did have a couple of people from the religions where they do the snake handling of rattlesnakes come in and want to rent it from us, but we didn't rent it to them. So we did that for the summer, and later on, when we after by the end of the summer, we realized we weren't going to make any money, and we gave up that idea and went back to Southwest Florida. So we had Snowflake for quite a few years, and she bred with three different males at three different times of the year. Never had any babies, not even stillborn. So we assumed with three different males, it was probably some kind of problem on her part. So we eventually sold her to Tom Crutchfield, and he also tried to breed her with some males, but eventually she died without ever having produced babies.
Mm. That's too bad. She was a beautiful specimen. I saw the picture in the book.
She was
Um,
totally snow white with bluish eyes, very much like the leucistic Texas rat snakes.
well, when I was in working at that pet store I told you about in the 90s, there was a photographer there that he was actually a entomologist because he didn't like any of the herpetology schools, and I know that he had went with Bill Love at least once to Madagascar, and he was actually in the article that Bill did it for Reptiles magazine, but I cannot remember the guy's name. He was a turtle guy. He living in Montana. He was actually keeping Russian tortoises outside all year long,
Yeah,
but I don't remember.
Bill actually did take several people to Madagascar over the years that were into reptiles, and I know the names of some of them, but I didn't go on those trips with them, so I've only ever met just a few of them. But I heard all the stories, and he had some real adventures there. He probably spent more than a year of his life in Madagascar because most of the trips were a good month and a half long. Because after the tourists left, then he would go for several weeks on his own, or sometimes with guides, or sometimes meet other friends, and they would just go explore new places that they didn't know about, partly just to explore them and partly to look for future places to take tourists. And he kept that up until things started getting tight just before the big recession around, I don't know, 2002 or 3 or 4. I think it was one of the last times he went.
Wow.
Okay, now I want to discuss genetics with you. Your corn snake projects. Was there ever an animal that you ended up with and thought, man, I really want to produce that morph, and it just didn't work out? It wasn't genetic.
Well, there was one that we called it a harlequin, and it was an amelanistic. Boy, this goes back to the 90s, I think. And it was just a very high white one. It was from some candy cane lines, but the white was like really, really pure white, and it almost seemed different enough that I was suspecting there could be something genetic that was more than selective breeding. Uh, it was just like a pure white with a pure red, but that snake was a female, as I remember, never did produce babies, and never got. I still had some of the siblings and parents, and never produced another one. That would have been pretty cool.
Hmm.
I've got a question about the lavender gene. I had some, I don't know, about 2000. Got them from a guy in Colorado when I was living there. And all of his heads had a beautiful, non-typical pattern on the top. And when you produced them lavenders, they were just beautiful. But somebody in the last 5 years says that lavender bloodline tends to have a lot of problems with die-off for some reason or other. Had you ever run across that with the lavender gene?
No, not really, but I severely downsized about, oh, 10 or 15 years ago before we moved to Arizona, as I was getting older and the market wasn't there, and I was doing other things. So I haven't had any lavenders or a lot of different kinds of morphs for like 15 years or more. So I haven't kept up very much with the newest things. Just if it's something that really appeals to me, I might read more about it or get one. But I've mostly concentrated on the various forms of oketees because I really like those a lot. And I just this past year got some palmettos too because I always like those. But back when I had the lavenders in, oh, must have been the late 90s and the early 2000s, and they were being crossed with some other things. Rich Zukowski actually was the one who got that started, and I think that came from an original one from Florida. Uh, so I don't remember either experiencing or seeing problems. It could be that people more recently have crossed them with some animals that haven't done as well or something like that. They might have
Mhm.
found new.
Well, I'd like
Unlike the blood reds, which when they started, and we got them from Eddie Leach, who had found the first ones uh, near Spuds, Florida, in northeastern Florida, not too far from St. Augustine. Uh, and he bred them and kept breeding them together, and they looked more and more like blood reds. But even some of the wild ones had a tendency to look like that. But in the beginning, they produced huge clutches of very tiny eggs, very small hatchlings that could be a bit of a pain to feed, and there was some male infertility. But once everybody started outcrossing to robust hypos and amels and so forth and so on, then those traits got diluted and weren't a real problem anymore.
So, what out of all the years you've been doing this, what is your favorite morph?
Well, it's not really a morph, I guess, but oketees have always been my favorites since before we even started breeding and we were traveling with our traveling reptile exhibit. I always loved high contrast, brightly
Mhm.
colored animals, and I've always liked species that are highly variable. Hence why I always like corns, and also I was really into Amazon tree boas back in the late 80s and into the 90s. We had several generations born of those. Uh, Anything that was highly variable and really colorful, I like. So the oketees have always been a favorite. Now I keep some oketees and some ultramel oketees. Uh, I may get back into the albino oketees, which I think we started the original lines of those back in the 80s. Uh, so I don't really have the space or the desire anymore. We're retired now, and I'm 70 now. So to have huge numbers of animals. So now that I've cut it down, that old saying about less is more is true. I can enjoy them a lot more than back when I used to produce 5 or 6 thousand babies a year of various colubrids mostly. So now I'm down to maybe a couple hundred a year, mostly of a few corns and a few tricolor hognose and a few of this and a few of that. I'll probably have one litter of Amazon tree boas this year, some blue tongue skinks, but it's more of just a hobby now that I breed and sell a few babies rather than anything resembling a full time business like I had back in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s.
Wow. So I'm a teacher by trade, so I always wonder about people's educational history.
or if there was a teacher that got you interested in this, or was it where you lived, or kind of the origin story?
Well, I grew up in Waukesha, Wisconsin, not too far from Milwaukee. And I always loved animals, even from the time I was a little kid. Whatever cat or dog or any kind of animal that crossed my path, I was into it immediately. So when I was in kindergarten or first grade, a boy chased a friend and myself home with a snake that he found in, well, at that time, I guess we were in northern Indiana. And I had never seen a snake up close before. So I ran home just like any kid would, and I told my father. And my father said, "No kid of mine is going to be afraid of snakes." He wasn't particularly, but he didn't want me to be afraid of them. So for some reason, one of the neighbors, I don't know why, they had a garter snake that at that age I would have estimated was about 10 feet long. And they had it in one of those old clothespin bags, those cloth clothespin bags that you hang up on the clothesline, or you used to back when people had clotheslines. They took it out and they made me hold it. I swear to you, that was the size of a reticulated python. And after a minute, I really liked it a lot. And my father created a monster that he never expected. So by the time I was in ninth grade, I had a biology teacher who had a boa constrictor that came in on a fruit shipment from South America, and he ended up with it. So the kids would get to sometimes take it out, feed it, measure it, and somebody would take it home for the summer. I got to do that. Uh, and I wanted snakes more than anything. Lizards were nice, frogs were nice, but snakes is what I wanted. They were just so graceful. I loved the way they moved and the colors and all that. So my father kept telling me, wait until you're in like 14 or 15 and you'll like boys and you'll forget about all these snakes. So finally I came to him and I said, I'm 15. I still like snakes better than boys. Can I have some now? And he said, you raise the money, then you can get one. Yeah, one. Uh, so we caught garter snakes. That there was a den not too far, and there was a pet shop in Milwaukee that would give you 35 cents credit for each garter snake you turned in, and you could get something else. So I got a bull snake from Spring Green, Wisconsin, and that was my very first snake that wasn't a garter snake. Uh, and it was pretty exciting. After that, I think my father gave up because I had a whole room full of snakes, and
Hmm.
that was the beginning.
So your dad sounds like he was kind of the fire starter here. What did your mom think about it?
I didn't have a mother. We were in foster
Oh,
home for that, and when I was in seventh grade, my father said, I'm the oldest of four. My father said, "Okay, you're in junior high now. Basically, you can be chief cook and bottle washer," and because he had to work a lot of hours to support us. So yeah, it was just my father.
wow.
So when I got out of high school, I got a job working as a nurse's aide, but I really wanted to. I always wanted to do a business. I also always had the entrepreneurial streak. I started up a little part-time pet shop in downtown Waukesha, which didn't make any money, but I learned a lot, and I kept my full-time job. So finally, when and then I worked as a nurse's aide for several years. So finally, when I went on a trip with my sister to San Antonio, because I always wanted to escape Wisconsin, and the roommate of Joe Laszlo proposed the idea of starting up this reptile exhibit. I had a few $1,000s saved, and we bought this old trailer and fixed it up. And since then, I did go to nursing school to be an LPN in 1981, and I did that for a while in order to raise enough money for us to start our breeding business. And we did that from about 85 or 86 until 89 when we got the opportunity to become partners with Rob McInnes, who worked at Pet Farm. We started Glades Herp, and that eventually became, I believe, the biggest mail order reptile supplier in the United States. And then 1995, we went our own way because we wanted to get back to roots. Bill wanted to do Madagascar tours and photography, and I wanted to go back to breeding the colubrids at home, uh, and just do our own thing like that. So it's been mostly self-employed in reptiles one way or the other most of our adult lives.
Wow.
We know Rob Roy. He used to hit one of the shows that we went to here in Texas. He is a colorful guy.
His son's
Yeah,
been coming though the last several years.
we don't see Rob too much, but we did go back to Florida about 4 or 5 years ago, and we actually are planning on going back again this next spring. And we're going to spend a couple weeks and visit all of our old Florida friends. We lived there practically our whole adult lives, so we have a lot of good old friends in Florida. Fortunately, Arizona is a place they like to come out to, and we just had some Florida friends here over the weekend. And except for the COVID time, we had quite a few friends come out to visit us.
That's nice.
Oh, I
Well,
love it. The retirement out here is perfect because it's a place where lots of herpers come and you get to have visitors. Uh, as you get older, you don't want to travel as much as you used to, but you still want to see old friends and make new friends. And we've made some really good friends out here in Arizona that we love to spend time with. And I have family living here for the first time in my adult life. I'm near
Oh,
family. So I really do love Arizona. And as much as I love Florida all my life, I do not miss the humidity and I do not miss the mosquitoes.
yeah, we're both desert rats. I don't know if I could handle being in high humidity areas. It makes me sweat a lot.
It's funny. Our Florida friends were here for about a week and a half, and he just texted me a few hours ago. He said, "We're back in Florida, and the wall of humidity hit us like a blanket as we got off the plane.
Oh man.
So
It
you
doesn't
never did. Go ahead.
it doesn't take long to be away from it before it hits you again when you go back to it."
Hmm.
So you've never been one to go out and find anything crazy in the wild?
Oh, when I was younger, I used to go with Bill quite a lot, just not as much as he did. Uh, I don't know about crazy stuff, but we got to see a lot of different things in a lot of parts of the US. And I've been in a few foreign countries, although most of them were to visit. Well, we had a bunch of exchange students in the mid 90s from all over the world. And we've been to see several of them in their home countries. And they've come back with their spouses and kids to see us again. Most of them we've kept in touch with. So we've gotten to visit them in places like Russia and Brazil. Bill went to Chile to visit one of them. It's been really great because we didn't have any biological kids of our own, but we have kids all over the world that are to us.
That's amazing. Have you ever hunted West Texas and found a gray band king snake?
We did hunt West Texas. Bill has more often than I have. Probably the most exciting thing I ever found there was a Trans-Pecos rat snake, and it was after this was probably back in the 70s, I think. We had been hunting and hunting like everybody, didn't see anything interesting. So 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, we were going back to the hotel, and there in the brickwork of the column of the hotel is a Trans-Pecos rat snake climbing up it.
Ah.
And so we immediately looked to see if there was anybody around there pranking us or something, because a lot of herpers at the hotel. But it was dark and quiet. There's nobody there. We suddenly got our second wind and went back out looking for more. But of course, we didn't find anything else. So, although we've been there, I think some of the coolest things we've found there, but they're really hard to catch if you're not real fast and agile, are those really pretty pink red coach whips out there. Those are beautiful.
Yep.
But don't think Bill has ever actually himself caught gray band either, and neither have I.
Well, have you ever bred gray band king snake?
We did back in the 80s when we were just trying a lot of different things. We did breed those for a while, and Transpecas. Never had great luck with Transpecas in Florida. They would seem to do well for a while and then just not do well after a while. I think the humidity just didn't agree with them. Gray bands actually
Mhm.
did better.
Hmm.
But the gray bands were such a pain to get the babies feeding. And at the time, the price was so low that when we were
Yeah.
doing it, it just didn't seem, and we had so many animals, it just didn't seem worthwhile. And after a while, we gave up on them. We were really into little tree vipers, uh, especially things like eyelash vipers, which again are highly variable. And we produced quite a few babies of those back in the 80s, uh, green ones, pink ones, yellow, gold ones, patternless. Just loved eyelash vipers. Probably that's the only venomous snake that I really miss now that we're not really doing venomous snakes anymore. Uh, but they're beautiful, and we had several other species, mostly from tropical Americas, but a few from Southeast Asia. But it's been decades since we've done those.
Well, both Rikus, do you have any secrets to getting them to feed? Because we have not had good luck getting those babies started.
Were they eyelash vipers or other kinds?
Hmm.
Yeah, Schlegelize.
We did very well with eyelash vipers because in Southwest Florida, it was really easy to get small tree frogs, and they really
Mm.
love to spread out tree frogs. And
Huh.
for some reason, this was really weird, but the baby females seem to be better feeders on the whole than the baby males. Don't know
Wow.
why. Uh, uh,
Interesting.
so, so what we would do is we would set them up in a big cage with a bunch of foliage, plants, and things like that, and we would get live small tree frogs and put them in with them, and they would chow down on them. And after they had grown a little bit and had lots of tree frogs in them, then we would usually start feeding them off of a forceps with pinky mice. And if, and of course, scenting first with frog. And if they were eating frogs real well, they usually transferred over to pinky mice. So if you don't have tree frogs available, I don't know if you already tried this, but maybe get some frozen from Florida or wherever, and
Hmm.
try the frozen ones. Of course, the live ones work better, but even the scenting might work. Uh, but that's what worked for us way back then.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So the gray bands, do you have any secrets to breeding them? Because we've had pairs through the years, still haven't produced a clutch of eggs yet.
Really,
Yeah.
I didn't think they were that difficult. So many people seem to do it. We didn't do it enough and long enough that I can claim any expertise. Maybe we were just lucky, but we treated them pretty much just like all the other colubrids and
Mm.
cooled them down, warmed them up, and gave them photo periods that changed. And I don't, I mean, this is back in the 80s, so I don't really remember doing anything different really with them. Uh, we also tried some of the pyros, the mountain king snakes from out here, and those I had always read need a lot of cooling, more than we were able to get our room in Florida. Because even with air conditioners in the winter, we often were lucky to get it down to 60.
Mm.
You just couldn't get it as cool as you wanted to because Florida would have a lot of warm days in the winter. So the pyros we actually put in the refrigerator. We had an extra refrigerator that we didn't need, and we set it to the highest setting, and then we put a little aquarium air stone, uh, a little air pump going through the seal of the door to give them fresh air, and we kept them in there. Only tried it for a few years. I think we had a clutch or two, but we didn't have great success with them, and we didn't keep it up. We
Mm.
also did way back then, before there were any morphs, we did some Western hognose, and at that time they weren't very popular really, and they were pretty cheap, and the babies were kind of a pain to get started. and I really like variable things, and they all just looked brown. So I kind of bored after a while. Uh, and by the time the morphs started coming out, I'd gotten into corn snakes and other things. So I never did any of the morphs until just recently. I'm raising up a few babies.
So what morphs are you working with?
I got some. I got some from two different people. The first ones I got were from Wes Moe over here in the Phoenix area on the west side, and then I got some from Justin Meacham, and so I was really interested in the brightly colored ones, the red albinos, the reddest of the albinos. So I got several from different bloodlines, and anacondas and super anacondas. Uh, eh, so the two that I got first probably should breed next spring. The others are just yearlings. I have one male that's just really cool because he's a uh, an email, but he's also a super anaconda and he's completely patternless, just has a little pattern on the head. So he is really pretty.
Wow.
Our male is also a conda, but he's just a conda. And he is beautiful. I love the albino hognose. They have a
They are
lot of
pretty. I've always
contrast.
been to like a lot of yellows and reds and pinks and things like that. So the females that I got from Justin are actually very pretty. They are anacondas, but they're normal color, but they're very pretty cocoa color, a very reddish brown. They'll make beautiful albinos. But they're even pretty in their own right. Instead of being that kind of blah brown, they're a very cocoa brown, reddish brown. So far, I'm pretty happy with them. But I haven't ever bred any since the '80s, so it's like kind of a new project to me.
Yeah, we've got a pair of het snows that we're raising up right now. They're only 6 months old, so they've got a ways. My dream is the leucistic. I've never even seen one in real life. I saw one in real life, and I like the white snakes. So
They are
someday.
pretty cool. Uh, the white snakes are cool. We had the white Texas rats back in the '80s. The only thing with all black or all white, like the black Mexican kings, once you get one that's all black or all white, then you've already achieved, the epitome. What else are you going to do with them besides just produce more of the same? And that's why I tend to like things that are highly variable because no matter how cool it is, you're always looking at it and saying, well, what if I had one that had a little more pattern or a little less pattern or a little more red? Yeah, I'm a terrible artist. I can't draw to save my life or paint, but I always looked at these highly variable animals as an artist's palette. And although I'm not a good artist, I'm creative, and it gives you an outlet for your creativity if you can't draw or paint.
Speaking of creativity, I am an author who's written one book, and I know how difficult it is. So I'd love to hear about the process of how you wrote your book.
That was a fun project. We wrote two of them. The second one was an updated version of the first one. The second one came out in 2005, and it was the Corn Snakes, the Comprehensive Owner's Guide. And the first one was, I think, in the late '90s. I forget which year it came out, but it's out of print now. And that was the Corn Snake Manual. So that was the first one we wrote, and we had written articles before, so it was just a lot more expanded about that. And we had a lot of reptile friends proofread it over and over and over again. They gave us free reign to pretty much do as we wanted with it. So it was a really fun project. And the second one, we had been collecting questions from people about the first
Mm.
one in the intervening years. So we had all these pages and pages of questions, either that were not included in the first one or that needed clarification. Plus,
Mhm.
new morphs and new information had been found in those years too. So pretty much the second one was just going over everything that we had collected all those years in between, and uh, and then adding to the second one. And that one is still in print. And as far as I know, it's still the most comprehensive book that's specifically just on corn snakes. A couple of people like Don Soderberg were working on another one that was going to be bigger, but I don't think any of those are out yet.
So in the process of the first book, which I have somewhere, but I'm hoping it didn't get purloined, did you get to interact with Philip DeVogely at all?
Oh, we got to know Philippe pretty well. He became a good friend, and as a matter of fact, he and his wife went on one of the Madagascar tours with Bill.
Wow.
So what kind of guy is he? I can't imagine his personality.
He was always ahead of his time. Way back when I first met him, Bill had already known him when I first met Bill, and he was in Florida at the time.
Uh-oh. Hopefully she'll pop back up in a second.
Our battery might have gone dead.
Hello, hello.
The phone call interfered.
Oh, all right. Well, we can see and hear you again.
Okay, it's a little scratchy now, but hopefully it'll get back to normal. So, anyway, yeah, Philippe was always ahead of his time. Way back, geez, when we were traveling with the Living Jungle, I think, or when we had just gotten back in the very late 70s, he already was making exhibits. Like the Europeans were always into the habitats, like you see for dart frogs and things like that. And at the time, the people who were getting into breeding just wanted to breed more, in boxes or whatever. So he was always ahead of his time, and he started the magazine. Well, let's see. I haven't thought of that in a while. It's been out of print for a long time.
The
And
Vivarium?
right now I'm drawing the Vivarium, yeah, and that magazine was too good for the masses. Most of the masses weren't too interested in it. It was really a specialty thing that people like us loved, but there weren't enough people like us to support a big magazine like that. So eventually it did go by the wayside. But he was always an innovator and into new things. I haven't seen him in a few years now. I haven't seen him since before COVID. He was going to come and talk to our Herp Society out here in the Phoenix area. He's over between San Diego and Los Angeles, so it's not that far away. But haven't seen him in a long time. I understand he still does a few of the shows though, out in California.
Amazing.
Someday I'd like to meet him.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we know that your time is precious, and we promise not to keep you for too long. So thank you so much. This was a complete honor. You're amazing. Definitely one of my heroes as a woman in the hobby, paving the way for us ladies.
Mine too, not as a woman.
Yes, just a herp hero.
Well, thanks for having me.
Let's go plug it in real quick.
Okay. Yeah, we just think you're so amazing, and we're so appreciative for you coming on and sharing your vast knowledge with us. You're just an amazing person.
Well, thank you.
Well, hopefully we'll get to figure out what our electronics problems are, and we'd love to interview you again sometime in the future. I've got more questions. There's lots of things I would like to know about your processes for how you produced all the morphs that you used to on your corn snakes. And I know it's been talked about quite a bit your tricolor hognose breedings. We're working with a pair right now, and have not produced. We had one female years ago that we bred her, and she got all of her eggs were infertile, and then all of a sudden she got an enlarged heart and just died. So it was probably old age. We probably waited too long to breed her.
That could be. Well, I'd love to come back sometime and I could tell you about some of the things that I learned by trial and error that worked for me, and some of them are used by a lot of people now. But yeah, let's do it again sometime.
Okay, guys. Of course I'm muted. Says everybody can see and hear me, but it looks like my muted. Wanted to thank everybody for stopping by. I'm so sorry that we weren't able to finish this off and say goodbye. Um, and we wanted to thank Kathy Love. She's an amazing woman who's done amazing things. Hoping you guys can hear me. Says it's still.
Well, we're on both the phone and the computer, I think.
Yeah, but I don't know if anybody can hear us on these microphones. So hopefully you can hear us on this. Anyway, everybody, thank you for stopping by. Take care and have a great evening.